everyone. Good to see you all. Hoping you're holding up okay. So many things going on, so much swirling with activities, both probably in your volunteer time as well as in your non-volunteer time and in your personal time. So thanks for showing up and engaging in this conversation today. Happy St. Patrick's Day if you're into that stuff. And I'd like to open up the meeting for March 17th, 2022 with public comments. Brian, do we have any public comments today?
I didn't receive any advanced notice of public comments. I do see a few people attending, and oh, we have one. I don't, their name just says Zoom user, but I'm gonna bring them into the meeting to provide a comment. Let's see here. All right, you're in the meeting.
Hello, everyone. Chair Shandas, commission members. I am in Jen Cairo. I'm sorry, I forget your title. Greetings from sunny Ohio. I am from Ohio originally, and this is where all the cities take care of street trees. Just this morning, I saw 2 crews out pruning some 12 to 15 foot maples. I have more a question today than a state.
Sorry to interrupt you. I think I know who you are, but could you introduce yourself?
Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you. My name's Noelle Studer-Spivak. I use she, her pronouns. I'm with Families for Climate, and I'm traveling. I'm at Cleveland Hopkins Airport right now. Anyway, my question for today is, I've been studying up on the resilience measures that are being proposed to City Council for the budget. Former Director Durbin presented them on March 3rd. And I was just curious for more information about the 6,000 trees that were proposed, the $3 million. Like, where will those trees go? What program? How will they be distributed? Who will be getting them? How do we assure that those people really want them and want to take care of them?
I feel like it's just like trolling all the countries now. I mean, you can't just urge Germany.
You might want to mute Rick. Thanks.
Yeah.
Sorry, Noelle. Go ahead.
That's all right. And trees are the best bang for your buck in terms of mitigation and adaptation, but some places you plant trees are even more important when you're shading pavement and concrete. So I was just hoping for some more information on that, since it's just one sentence in that budget proposal. Thank you.
Jen, I think that might be a question for you. Would you mind?
Yes, and good morning, Nicole. This actually was going to be in my City Forester's report today, because Bruce had asked a similar question, so we can do it now. Yes, absolutely. Where trees go, what those trees are they the right trees for the situation, the climate, all those things count a whole lot. We all know that and agree with that. So that 6,000 trees, that is part of Parks budget request for fiscal year 22-23, which would start in July. And that specifically is a request for use of the city's allocation of federal ARPA funds, American Response Plan Act. Ooh, did I get that wrong? What's ARPA, Brian?
I think it's American
Recovery.
Yeah.
That's it. Sorry. I've said it different ways now. ARPA funds. Nicole, it's really simple at this point. It's a competing request. So other requests have been made of City Council for use of the funds that the city has from ARPA. And it is 6,000 trees that we would plant as part of Urban Forestry's program, which includes park trees, public property trees, street trees, private property trees, and specific to your comment about shading pavement, and also making sure people want to have trees. Those are areas we're super sensitive to and aware of and have built our programs around. For example, with street trees, what we do, it's free street tree planting with 3 years of free establishment maintenance. However, it's only from folks who want those street trees adjacent to their property, because of the city's policy that requires those property owners to maintain that city asset. And so we are very careful, use a few rounds of do you want a tree do you not want a tree? And only if they tell us they don't want a tree, then we don't do it. So if you look at the city's website on tree planting, you can see there the programs, the program components that those 6,000 trees will be used in if we receive the funding, which we will not know for as late as June. We wouldn't know. Does that answer the question?
Noelle, are you there?
Maybe we lost
Still?
her.
I'm sorry. So it's not an opt-out program anymore? People have to actually respond in the affirmative that they do want trees?
No, it is continues to be an opt-out program. So sorry if that wasn't clear. We identify viable planting locations. There are many, many limitations on where there's actually space in streets for trees. Those are in the priority neighborhoods, which are low canopy, low income, and where there's a higher percentage according to the census of communities of color. We contact the property owner and ask them if they want, tell them we're going to plant a tree. However, we explain the maintenance obligation and ask them to let us know if they don't want a tree. We do 2 other versions of that thereafter. So it is an opt-out program rather than opt-in. Opt-in historically has been very well used by folks who often already are in a good position to have trees and more active and engaging with government, which is why we're trying this approach. And that's according to national studies as well as our own experience in Portland.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right. Thanks, Noelle.
Vivek, can I
Yeah,
ask?
Barbara.
Okay, thank you. Can I ask Noelle a question?
Sure. Yeah.
So
We're-
Noelle, this is Barbara Hollenbeck. We met when I was with the Forest Service and you were a student.
I know, 20 years ago.
Yeah. So is that statewide that trees in the public right of way are cared for by the city? And what I'm trying to figure out is if that's a state mandate or if that's done city by city, county by county. Do you know?
I think here in Ohio, it's city by city.
Okay.
And, but it's just the normal state of affairs here. I'm not sure if it happened when Dutch elm disease swept through and everything was logged.
Mm.
They have more of a sense of, I don't know, they understand what it feels like to have all the trees leveled. And so they really, I think, value them much more in the Great Lakes region and other parts of the country.
Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you so much.
And
Thank you.
Barbara, to also answer your question, having our team having looked into street tree policies across the nation and also in other countries, I have yet to see a state requirement around who manages street trees. It seems to be municipality by municipality. And the majority of American cities by far that are of our size in Portland or larger, the city is responsible for that street tree maintenance in whole or at least in part.
Yeah, I just wondered if that was something new, but yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Barbara. Great. Thanks, Noelle. I'd like, for sake of time, just to keep moving. We have 2 sets of minutes from December and January that Brian has sent to commissioners, to you all commissioners, and wanted to take a minute to, I think we have quorum. So even though Bruce is not here right now, actually with Bruce not being here right now, I don't think we have quorum.
We
Well,
don't actually, yeah.
So we can't vote on the minutes here, technically. So and if Bruce doesn't come back, then I think we're gonna have to hold off any votes this time and just have a discussion about the other items that are on the agenda
fine.
today. Okay,
So
so
if you-
close.
Yeah, if you do see any changes to the minutes, feel free just to email them to me and we can vote next month.
Yes, see, this is a great example of one person making a big difference. All right, so I'll keep going down the agenda here. We have, if Bruce doesn't come back, we're gonna move on to, well, I guess we can't vote for Leah and Adrian joining the appeals board either. Oh, bummer. Those are
Yeah.
short. Hopefully we can cover those next time.
Vivek,
Yeah.
Adrian is already, did we vote? She's already been on through a hearing.
Adrian is on the appeals board. This would be to transition her to the chair, but we don't have an appeal plan for next month. So I think we're fine just to push this to next month also.
Okay, yeah, if she wasn't voted on originally, it seems like there might be somebody else that wasn't voted on, but I can't remember.
Mhm, yeah.
Wow. And we are back on track time-wise. Jen, I want to turn it over to you 30 seconds early. Just want to mark this occasion. I'm actually turning it over to you 30 seconds early.
Don't count
Don't
your
ever say,
chicken.
you can never say I didn't do this on time, Nick, because I have once.
Go Vivek. Okay. I have 5 items for us this morning. So first, as you all, I think, are aware, we did present the canopy report to City Council yesterday. Thanks very much to Jeff Ramsey, who led that project, among the many other things he does on our team in urban forestry. Also to Dr. Chandas for his extensive work on the same topic and for presenting and answering questions, both of them yesterday, and Daniel for testifying on behalf of the commission and also drafting the letter the commission submitted. And I understand Megan helped with that drafting too, so thank you both. There was some great testimony yesterday, I think, and great discussion. I appreciated Commissioner Rubio's opening framing and that she is leading a resolution for council to vote on. And I'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. I also wanted to address Commissioner Mapp's comment. Commissioner Mapps, if you weren't there, stated that the level of canopy loss that we reported was a misrepresentation of the actual study results from our own study because they're within the statistical margin of error. In response to that, we noted that the information produced by both Dr. Chandas at PSU, so Vivek, and also Metro confirmed our conclusions that indeed canopy decline is happening, even though it's within the margin of error. In addition, the aerial imagery that we used for the study was taken in 2020 before the 2021 winter storm losses and heat dome effect, both of which demonstrably even further reduced Portland's forest. Tree canopy in Portland, we all should remember and have in our pocket to talk about, continues to be notably below the city's goal and well below the goals and extent of canopy of more densely populated cities. For example, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania has more dense people population, but has over 40% canopy cover, while Portland has less than 30%. And Pittsburgh has a canopy goal of 60%, and Portland's goal is 33%. New York City is another example. It's a much more densely populated city than Portland, and it has 21% average canopy cover. That's the same low canopy level as Portland has east of the Willamette River, where 80% of Portlanders live. So given the remarkable canopy inequity in Portland and the visible impacts of the climate crisis, it's dangerous to understate the importance of canopy decline that we're tracking for Portlanders today and for the coming decades. And Commissioner Mapps had asked, opened the door for follow-up from staff on his comments. So as a bureau, we're looking at doing that. I want to let you know too that prior to the council item yesterday, Parks circulated information on the report and the council agenda appointment via the web, social media. It was in our newsletter, Tree Bark, and there was also a press release that was put out, and we're responding to media requests right now. And then finally, the resolution that Commissioner Rubio mentioned is the next step on this to activate the results of the report, and that's in progress. If it's approved by council, a key provision would have the Water Bureau, Bureau of Transportation, Bureau of Environmental Services, Bureau of Development Services, and Bureau of Planning and Sustainability work with Portland Parks and Rec to identify actions that will be taken to preserve and expand the forest and report those actions back to council by this fall. Details to be determined in the commission offices, but that is in progress. So we'll keep you up to date on that. I'm going to move on to another item. Of course, a big part of preserving, caring for, and expanding our urban forests is having people whose job it is to do that work. And we continue to develop positions, and there's a lot of hiring and organization change going on in urban forestry. So since last March, we've hired 10 new positions. That's unprecedented to have that many. If we get one a year, that's usually great news for us. And that's, of course, yes, thank you, Barbara. It's a really big deal. And it's, of course, thanks to Portland voters approving the Parks Operations Levy. Let's never forget that. Right now, we have recruitments for 7 other classifications, which are city job types, in progress. Some of those include multiple positions, so we'll be hiring a lot more than 10 folks. And there's a lot more new positions that will be posted for applications in the coming weeks, including things to watch for: Arborist 3, Arborist 4, those are both climbing arborists, so up off the ground daily, very technical tree work. Arborist 4s are lead arborists, and also lead tree inspectors, so you can keep an eye out for those. I wanted to let you know about current job openings too, in the hopes that you'd spread the word to your networks and folks you know. Right now, there's an urban forest planning and policy analyst position that's open. This is one you've heard a lot before, about before, if not in that title. This would be the person that leads all of our policy work, high-level policy work. So this will be the person that leads updating and monitoring and reporting on Portland's urban forest management plan, also leading Title 11 amendments, leading work with other bureaus like Water Bureau's 10-foot rule and their administrative rule, things like Streets 2035 with Bureau of Transportation, because those are really impactful types of projects, of course, and we haven't wanted to not do them. We've basically cobbled together staff resources to do that. Not those folks have been great, but it really needs dedicated time and attention to lead that effort. So like Brian is here, I see Nick in the meeting, Rick Faber I see in the meeting, and I also, we've all worked on those types of projects, catch as catch can. So it's a big deal that that position's out there. Please spread the word. I'm happy to say the folks in PBOT planning, when they saw it open, made comments in a meeting with me, how excited they were to see it because they know how much we need it, which is really encouraging to hear from PBOT planning, that particular part. Another one that's open right now is tree inspector. We're hoping to hire at least 2 tree inspectors now from that recruitment. Also a super important job. And we have several positions, I think 9, for urban forestry assistants. These are temporary seasonal positions called, in city speak, community service aides 2. They will be folks working on as the elm monitor, seasonal elm monitor, also tree planting and planting monitoring program staff, and tree inventory program staff, because we will start this summer refreshing the street tree inventory, which is largely done by Portlanders volunteering their time. So these are great opportunities, these UF assistant positions for workforce development, folks wanting to build skills, learn, get into urban forestry and arboriculture professions, and future urban forestry professions. In fact, several of our current staff started off in positions like the UF assistant or community service aide 2. Tree tech supervisor Julie Fukuda started in that role. Tree tech Mason Wardell, botanic specialists Nick Desai and Nick Rossmiller and Jeff Ramsey. Our permitting and regulations coordinator Rick Faber started in a position like that. Our tree maintenance operations administrative specialist Natasha Lepi, also Angie DeSalvo, one of our managers, and arborist Javier Richie Martinez and Todd Keeland. So there's a great track record of starting there and moving into the organization. So I'll put something in the chat about the postings, and I would ask that you please spread them broadly and widely. Last few quick things. Oh, I already talked about ARPA, so we get to skip that one. Then I only have one more thing, and that is the retreat, the commission retreat. So Brian, Vivek, and I have been working on the beginnings of planning for that, and I just wanted to give you all a heads up that we're kind of aiming for May 4th in the morning, maybe 8:30 to 12:30 at Leach Botanic Garden, which Bruce has made arrangements for. That's great. So as follow-up, Brian will email all of the commissioners to find out about their individual availability and if that'll work. And hopefully we can make it work. And if not, we'll figure it out. That concludes my report. If anyone has questions, please let me know.
Great, thanks, Jen. Questions, Megan?
I just had a question about I wasn't able to attend yesterday. I am hoping to watch, but Jen and, or, Daniel or Vivek, like, just in terms of like MAPE's questions and or comments, like, was it coming at it from like a very clarifying stance, or I'm just trying to, I wasn't there, so if there's anything else to share based on kind of the feel of what he was sharing, I'd be curious.
I'll say something and then maybe Vivek would want to comment too, because he also responded in real time to Commissioner Maps. He started off saying that he had read the report and he's a scientist. And he was really asking for, it was right in that, margin of error, and our margin of error is narrow and our findings do fall within the margin of error. So his perspective was that we hadn't interpreted the findings correctly because we had said decline when in fact it's within the margin of error. That was my take on it. Vivek, would you add anything to that?
Yeah, just real quickly. I mean, I didn't want to get into the nuances, nor did Jeff, about the statistics of it. And I mean, if you're sampling 100 million points in Portland, your margin of error would go down to 0.01 or so, right? It'd go down proportionally to the more sampling you're doing. And so in this case, Jeff Ramsey was describing 4,500-ish points that were, and so your margin of error is in the single digits at some level. And so the question, I think, was, I interpreted it as a shrewd question in terms of at least recognizing that if we're saying that there's a reduction, how do we really know it's a reduction? It could be a 1% gain because, plus or minus is really what we're talking about with margin of error. And so what we're going to be doing with Metro and what we're going to be further refining is just ways to triangulate that, whether it's a reduction. And we have preliminary evidence. We haven't published or gotten this out yet. That there is a reduction, and Metro is working on something similar, and we want to all come to the same conclusion using these different methods, right? So that's all I have to add to that. Looks like Daniel, does that help, Megan? Okay, Daniel.
Thanks. Yeah, I actually had a question, something a little different. Jen, you mentioned that with the ARPA funds, there's funding for 6,000 street trees to go in the ground. And I'm just wondering, since, that's a large number of street trees to go in the ground. Is that all planned to happen for 1 year? Is it going to be over 2 years? And if so, I'm just curious about how they're going to get into the ground, because that's just a lot of trees. So I'm wondering if you could maybe expand on that a bit.
Sure. Good questions. Yes, 2 years. So ARPA funding, by definition, we have to use in a certain amount of time, and that's 2 years. And so we coulda, woulda asked for a lot more because it's an opportunity, right, that has come along. But in fact, we were careful to make sure that those are numbers that we can actually achieve.
So, but I'm just curious how they're going to get in the ground. Like who's gonna put them in the ground, because that's such a large number of trees.
Yeah, I'll speak to that, and then I see Brian's hand up, and was very involved in creating that with Angie DeSalvo too, so he can speak to it as well. But we are doing our current program, which you've heard about before, which covers a variety of different types of planting. So getting them in the ground, some of it will be contractors doing that, some will be volunteers doing that, some will be private property owners planting trees in their yards, and some will be city staff planting those trees. Brian, would you have anything to add?
Yeah, one, just a clarification that the 6,000 trees is across all the different types of plantings. That's not just street trees. So that includes the yard tree giveaway, which is about 2,000, 2,500 per year of those. And ARPA funding has to be spent by the end of 2024. And so really that gives us about 1.5 planting seasons to use it. And we know that, planning for tree planting is a year and a half out process in and of itself. So that 6,000 number is really based on what we anticipate to plant over those 2 seasons. And we will spend the ARPA funds first, while also, trying to plant above what we had planned to the degree that we can get that in place over that time period. But that number was largely based on funding the existing program over that time period, which would both allow us to plant above what we anticipate over that year, while while also preserving the tree planting fund over that time to be spent after that as well.
Okay, well, I think the first part of what you said answered my question, because if you figure it's not just street trees, that makes it a lot more doable. So
yeah, exactly.
But sorry, go ahead.
Quick add as well, because I'm remembering something I should have mentioned. We are continuing to evolve the planting program. You know, since we just started really with funding in 2015, we're continuing to look at where we need to plant and how. So that continues to happen. And one element of that, I believe Brian emailed you all about this, but Parks now has a grant opportunity that's out for community groups. So local groups to work with us on things tree in addition to other park activities. So that could be park tree planting or stewardship activities. So I'll put that in the chat as well. Please circulate that around, and we're really eager to get some interest in that and work with new partners.
Sounds good. Thanks. Excellent. Just one quick question, Jen. You mentioned this policy position that's coming on? When do you expect that person to be on board, and could they help champion a revision of the urban forest management plan at some point if funding gets allocated by city council for that?
Yeah, so I'll speak and then hand it to Brian, who will be hiring and supervising that position. So Vivek, we are planning, as you all have heard, and we have said at council report now for 2 years, we've been talking about updating the forest management plan. So that is certainly going to happen, and that person will be a leader of that project. And we already have funding for that because we are hiring this position with Parks Levy funds. We will have some additional consultant needs, I'm sure, but we have ways to cover that as well. Brian, any additions?
No, that's spot on. The posting closes on March 21st, although we've already decided to extend that to March 28th, just to give a little more time to build up that applicant pool. And then, updating the urban forest management plan will be one of the first projects they'll be working on. And of course, the UFC has a really significant Title 11 role in advising and being part of that process. So really looking forward to that.
Great. Okay. Thank you, Jen, for the Forester's report. Your questions, commissioners. I'd like to move on. Wow, this is like the best timing ever. So I have a lot of guilt over my lack of keeping us on time. So as you could tell, so I'd like to move on to the
Vivek, Daniel's trying to keep you off schedule.
Oh boy, there you go, Daniel. Come in right on the clock. What do you got?
Yeah, sorry about this. Jen, could you give us an update on filling the new commissioner roles and what the timing and all that is, please?
Thank you. Important, right?
Sure. I'll let Brian do that.
Yes. So we are going to council a little bit earlier than we had actually planned because things were moving ahead quickly. So new commissioners will be appointed on April 13th by City Council, which means they'll be in place for the April 21st meeting. 3 new ones will be appointed. Megan will also be reappointed for a second term. So we're thrilled that Megan is continuing with the UFC. I will add that Anjanette is due for renewal, and she has elected not to renew for a second term, but she will continue to serve, which we learned from the city attorney she is allowed to do until her seat is filled. So she's not able to make it today, but she will be with us for the next few months. So we are hoping next week, likely the soonest, but definitely within the next week or two, to start to open up applications again for the next round, since we will have 2 seats to fill still.
So follow-up question there. We actually have 4 commissioners currently who've been identified as potentially leaving, but we're filling 3 seats. So does that mean that Greg or Barbara are going to stay on?
It's really they're staying on for this March meeting, but since we are filling their seats, they'll be their time of the commission will end after this this meeting, and then we'll move on to the next recruitment after that.
But we have 4 openings. And
Yeah.
you said there were going to be 3 seats filled, so that would mean that one of the current folks could stay on until you fill that 4th seat.
Yeah, I can email the commission on the sort of logistics of the moving parts there after this.
Yeah, so did we ever get that? I mean, I thought when we redid the bylaws, we kind of addressed that issue of partial terms and all that, because it seems like we're never going to get people who are able to serve a full two terms, because so many people, for various personal reasons, have to leave in the middle of a term. I mean, according to the way it is now, I term out next year, even though that will only have been 6 years on the commission. So, you know, we're going to continue to have that kind of thing going. And it's, you know, it would be great to be able to have people like, I mean, it takes a year or two to really be effective, I think.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And we are appointing all new commissioners to full 4-year terms going forward. So that was a bit of a hangover from the sort of pre-Title 11 way of doing things. That unfortunately did result in some people having shorter initial terms. But we are correcting that.
But we still have the situation that the code does say that you fill until the position, you can stay on until the position is filled. And so we have 4 commissioners leaving and only 3. So does one of the existing people, can they stay on until we fill that 4th seat?
So Daniel, I think I understand what you're asking. And it's actually, think of it in terms of like a city council seat, right? If somebody's elected to a city council seat and they leave, they have to have a new election to fill it. Nobody just shifts over and takes that over. And it's the same here as explained by Rob, the city attorney. So if somebody leaves and the seat's open, then we do a recruitment to fill the seat. It doesn't mean somebody else moves into that seat. Does that do you understand what I'm saying?
Yes and no, but Title 11 does have a phrase in there that talks about people staying until.
Notwithstanding.
I mean, I guess you could say, well, we're actually filling your seat and we're filling your seat and we're filling your seat. But the fact is we're going to be 1 person short. And I think that's open to Title 11's open enough to interpretation that we could have 1 person stay on.
We did cover that specifically with Rob, the city attorney, and his interpretation of the code is that the notwithstanding is the phrase you're talking about. So if somebody's term is up and we don't have somebody coming in right behind them already appointed by city council, then they can stay on until somebody fills their seat. However, if somebody steps down before their term is up, we cannot have somebody else on the commission stay in their seat. That has to get re-recruited for.
So why not we only have, I think we only have 1 person stepping down, Lorena. The other 3 are
we have 2. We have 2 folks stepping down, as Brian said. Anjanette is not going to renew. She could do another term and hers expires. So we'll be recruiting to fill that as well. And I saw Anjanette here. Hi, Anjanette. Now I don't see her, but. And Brian and he says in the chat, he'll be sharing information on the new members once we have confirmation from the mayor's office. So
Okay.
Right now they're just recommendations going in and we can follow up by email on those things with you all.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and I mean, it's probably going to be an ongoing throughout the year process if people step down, and we're gonna,
And that's not, this isn't new. I'm been
right.
doing this for a while now, and you know, folks serve their time, and sometimes things come up in life, things change, they need to step down, and we do a recruitment. And there's an interest also, you know, with the term limits that are set up by the city code and by bylaws, in trying to create opportunities for folks to come into the commission. Prior to Title 11, with term limits, so to speak, we had members who were very dedicated, but serving for many, many years, and there wasn't that kind of new voice coming in.
Yeah. Great. Thanks, Daniel. Thanks, Jen and Brian. I'd like to transition to economic opportunity analysis. I think we have an update. Is that Tom and Jeff are here for that? Is that right, Brian?
Yep, that's right.
Great. Welcome, Tom. Welcome, Jeff. We set aside about 45 minutes of this. We're running a little bit late, as you can tell, so we might have to spill over in the Title 11 amendments that Brian and Nick are going to talk about. But I'd like to check to see if you have about 35 minutes, is that sufficient for this update?
All depends on your questions.
Okay, sounds good. So you have, yeah, thanks. And if you have specific areas that you're wanting to emphasize or wanting some feedback on, please let us know prior to kind of digging in.
Sure.
Be great. Okay, and I'll just turn it over to you. You can introduce yourself, and
Okay.
Yeah, we'll get going.
Good morning, everybody. I am Tom Armstrong. I'm a supervising planner with the Bureau of Planning and Sustainability, and I oversee the update to our economic opportunities analysis. With me this morning is Rachel Hoy, who's a senior planner on the BPS team. Also, hopefully at some point this morning, Steve Kuntz, another senior planner on the team, will join us. Steve's been having some computer issues, so he may not be able to join us this morning. So anyway, we have a short slideshow to walk through. This really is an orientation slideshow. We gave this slideshow, a version of this slideshow, to the Planning and Sustainability Commission last month. We've also briefed Commissioner Rubio, has seen a similar thing, as well as some community groups and business district associations. And we really are at the start of this EOA update process. And there's Steve. And so I'll just jump into it, and I will share my screen here, and we'll roll through this, and then we can get questions from you at the end.
Hey, Tom.
Yeah.
Sorry, this is Jen. Before you begin, I'm realizing we didn't really frame this up for the commission in terms of their role. So do you mind if I just take a moment to do that?
Sure.
Okay, so commissioners, this is early in the process, and you've heard this went before the Planning and Sustainability Commission, and some of the city council offices, including Commissioner Rubio, have been briefed on the project. So we wanted this to come to you now, one, because it was at the PSC around this time too. And also, Brian and Brett Horner, the Parks Planning Lead, have been representing parks in the process. And we know that city projects like this, it's important early for there to be some understanding on the part of our advisory groups like you. And this is also an opportunity as well to raise questions, as Tom said, but also communicate what you think the tree aspects of this project could be or should be. So just keep that in mind as you're listening. Thanks. Take it away, Tom.
Yeah. We'll go through, talk about what an EOA is, and what are some of the project goals for that. Then where we start is sort of reviewing recent market trends, how we've been growing, what types of jobs we've been growing, and then we will explain sort of what this early phase engagement process is going to look like and what we're building towards, and then talk a little bit as what Jen was just talking about in terms of conceptual scenarios, policy choices, and how we're beginning to establish an evaluation framework in how we look at those choices. So the EOA is a required document. It's what we call a background report to the comprehensive plan. It guides and supports sort of primarily our land use planning and zoning decisions is where it comes into play. It is required by statewide planning goal 9, which guides economic development. And essentially what it is each city is required to show that they have a 20-year growth capacity to accommodated forecasted employment growth. At the end of the day, that's what an EOA is. And we go through a process, reviewing sort of recent development trends, changes in the market. We look at an employment growth forecast. We have Metro does a regional growth forecast, and then allocates that to each jurisdiction within the Metro region. We take that forecast and do a finer detail of it. And that's where some of the policy choices come in terms of types of employment growth we can expect in the future. We compare that to our development capacity in terms of where we think vacant and underutilized or redevelopment properties are likely to occur. And then we do a reconciliation, a supply and demand analysis. And I'll show you what that looks like here in just a second. And as part of that reconciliation, there's a number of different policy choices, that we need to make, and we need to look at the entire comprehensive plan, not just the economic policies and goals, but also our natural resource goals, our community livability goals, that broad spectrum of the goals and policies in the comprehensive plan. This is the table. This is the supply and demand analysis that came out of the 2016 EOA, and at a very high level, we think of the city in sort of 4 broad buckets or categories of employment land. The central city being the main sort of office district in the city, our industrial areas, our neighborhood commercial zones that are scattered throughout the city, as well as our campus institutions, our hospitals and colleges. And we go through a process to allocate expected job growth in each of those areas. And in turn, given that job growth, what kind of and the type of development that occurs in those areas, what kind of land development capacity demand is there. We compare that to the supply that's available in those areas. And as you can see here in the right-hand column, we hopefully or have to, according to the state rules, show a surplus, show that we can meet that expected growth demand. And what you see here in the final column on the right is how our current zoning and our expected sort of vacant land and redevelopable land results in that we have lots of capacity in the central city. We have lots of capacity in our neighborhood commercial areas. Last time around, we made some changes to the campus institution zoning that created a lot of capacity there. We always sort of wind up talking about the industrial area because we have such a tight supply of land there that inevitably these discussions come back to what's going on in the industrial area, how do different policy changes or zoning changes impact that development capacity in the industrial area. And that's where we were with the Title 11 changes in the heavy and planting requirements and preservation requirements in the heavy industrial zone, the IH zone. That's where we were, what was that, 18 months ago. And this tight supply and that impact is sort of what prevented us from moving forward with that decision at that time. So this time around, our goals are to, again, sort of go out from 2035 and look out to 2045 and, provide an adequate land supply for the forecast out to 2045. We are also looking at our goals around inclusive prosperity and reducing BIPOC income disparities, which Steve will talk about here in a little bit. And again, back to that industrial area, looking at that industrial growth capacity, and at the same time, how do we optimize the other objectives that we want to achieve in that area, such as tree planting or expanding E-zones along the Columbia Slough, floodplain protections in the north reach of the Willamette River. And again, sort of the policy directions that we have out of Chapter 6 in the comprehensive plan, which is the economic development chapter, is that we want and we're planning for a diverse and growing city economy. And we want to maintain our competitiveness in the traded sectors. And we want this to promote this equitable household prosperity. And again, Steve will share here a few slides on how recent growth trends have not been equitable, and dig into that a little bit. The reason we're doing this now is, we do have a policy. We set a policy in the comp plan to keep this analysis fresh and to do an update every 5 to 7 years. We do have a new forecast from Metro that allocates growth out to 2045 that we can utilize. We are sort of at what we call the end of a business cycle, that, between recessions, sort of peak to peak or valley to valley. We're coming out of a valley here with the pandemic recession. And so it's a good time to sort of look at those trends. And as I said, we have a lot of decisions that we want to make as a city that are dependent on having this analysis and being able to incorporate those decisions into this analysis and really look and analyze and consider how those decisions impact our economy and our future growth capacity. And again, back to this theme of promoting shared prosperity. Steve, are you on? Do you want to take over here?
Thanks, Tom. Good morning, commissioners. I'm Steve Kuntz. I'm a senior economic planner at BPS, and I've presented to you before some of this information. The forecast that Tom mentioned needs to be based on a trends analysis of growth and market opportunities, which we'll be publishing in the coming days. And as my part of the presentation, I want to go over some of the issues that have come out of that work. State Planning Goal 9 and the EOA generally look at growth opportunities in terms of business district types, and that is explained in this map and the corresponding pie chart of sectors. We're looking at growth opportunities by business district and generally land use sectors that correspond to these business district types, the same colors. Office jobs are primarily located in the central city. Industrial areas, manufacturing and distribution jobs primarily in the industrial areas along the rivers. Neighborhood commercial areas shown in red are the core place for retail and consumer services. And you can't see them as well, but 15 large college campuses and hospital campuses are shown in healthcare and education, are a big part of the economy as well. Each of these sector types generally represent about a fourth of city jobs and about a fourth of regional jobs. So the takeaway here is that the growing economy has diverse land needs. Tom, I'll shift to the next slide. Portland is part of a growing region. The region has been growing 50 to 60% faster than the nation. terms of jobs in the last 3 business cycles. And this graph shows that trend. And it also shows that trend in terms of those 4 sector types that I talked about in the previous slide. They're each growing. One takeaway here is that growth has been fairly diverse in the last, well, throughout this last 3 business cycles, but particularly in the last business cycle, it's ranged from growth of 1% to 2% per year in each of these sectors. And a second takeaway here is that the downswings have a lot of influence in this long-term trend. In the previous 2, really 3 business cycles, the industrial areas had the biggest job losses in the downswing. That has shifted in the current recession, and the bigger job losses have been in consumer services and in healthcare and education. Tom, I'll shift to the next slide. We don't have quite as much time as we've done with making these presentations to the Planning and Sustainability Commission and others, so I'm rushing through this a little bit. On this slide, I just want to point out that sectors aren't quite the same as business districts in terms of the sector mix. Generally, business districts are specialized. So in this, in the first 3 bars on the left in this chart, it shows office growth in peak periods in the recent business cycles. And office jobs and office growth are primarily concentrated in the central city that's shown here in blue. And so it shows the relationship between the office sectors and the central city. The next 3 bars show industrial sector growth, and it's primarily located in the city of Portland, and it's primarily located in the industrial areas, and it's growing in the industrial areas, and it's actually declining in other parts of the city. The other 2 sector types are more mixed, but healthcare and education is more concentrated in the campus institutions, and neighborhood commercial has a bigger share of retail and services. And Tom, I'll shift again. Looking at development trends, they're a little bit different than job growth trends. Partly in that the industrial building space is growing slightly faster than retail or office building space. This chart shows essentially growth in new occupied building space by building type in the region, in different geographies in the region during the last business cycle from 2008 to 2019. One takeaway from this is that multifamily housing really dominated development trends in the last business cycle, particularly in the commercial areas that are shown here in yellow. A second takeaway, and that goes along with the higher density of those building types, and it achieves higher development revenues in developing that land for that use. A second takeaway here is that growth through redevelopment in higher density building types is meeting employment demand unevenly. And the biggest example of that is industrial building space. As shown here, in the industrial areas, we added about nearly 7 million square feet of industrial building space, occupied space in the last business cycle. But we also lost about 2 million square feet of industrial building space in the commercial areas, in the central city and other commercial areas, through displacement of industrial space by higher density building types. So meeting the demand for employment requires also a certain amount of vacant space to accommodate, fully accommodate that growth. The goals that Tom talked about of economic prosperity goals in the comp plan also came out of the Portland plan. 3 major themes were diverse city job growth at pace with the region as the economic center of the region. A second is traded sector growth, which really drives regional prosperity. And a third is improvement in inclusive prosperity and essentially economic equity. Looking at trends in the last 20 years, really, we've done well at meeting the first two goals, and we've backslid on economic equity goals. And so I have a few slides that address what's happening there. And particularly 3 trends stand out. One is declining or increasing income increasing income inequality, and a second is continuing racial income disparities, and a third is declining affordability that's resulting in a growing share of poor households in the city. On the first trend, these 2 charts show essentially economic or income inequality trends in the region in the last 2 business cycles. Income inequality is a national trend, which is occurring faster here. The first chart on the top shows change in the economy by in terms of middle wage jobs, high wage jobs, and low wage jobs by occupation type. And the middle wage occupations have declined from 58% in 2000 to 48% in 2019, which is about twice as fast as the national trend. The second chart here shows the rationale why this is happening is that even though the middle wage jobs are about half of the economy, nearly all of the growth has been in high wage and low wage jobs, both at the national level and at the regional level. Regional level is shown here in blue. However, the national trend is confusing here. When you break it down by region, essentially the faster growing regions are growing middle wage jobs at a fairly healthy rate, as fast as or higher than median job growth overall in the nation. But the slower growing and shrinking regions are losing a lot of middle wage jobs. Portland is in a unique position relative to those 2, as we're a faster growing region, but we have flat middle wage job growth. The 2 takeaways from this slide are, one, that we're essentially growing an economy of and a community of haves and have-nots by the types of jobs that are growing here. And second, that the burden of these income inequality trends are primarily on the working class, on people without college degrees that rely on middle wage jobs for upward mobility. Tom, I'll shift to the next slide. I don't want to talk about this one too much, but our job growth pattern in the previous slide is more J-shaped, and essentially more high wage jobs are growing here, and our growth in new households reflects that. The new households in the region in the last business cycle are shown here by income distribution, and it has that same J-shaped trend that the vast majority of our household growth has been in high income households. 85% of the new households made more than $100,000 a year, and over half made more than $150,000 a year. And we have some decline in the middle part of that, of the income distribution. A second major trend, equity trend, is persistent racial income disparities. You've seen slides on this before, so I don't want to talk too much about it, but this shows median household income by race in the region and trends in the last decade. And essentially, median incomes in Black households are only about half, slightly more than half of median income in white households in the region. And most other racial groups are in between, and those disparities haven't been declining. A third major trend is declining affordability, and it is resulting in an increasing share of poor people. When I typically look at wages and they're inflation adjusted by the Consumer Price Index, it makes wages look flat for low wage and middle wage workers. But this slide shows inflation adjustment based on the income self-sufficiency index, which is used.
Whoop. Looks like we've got Steve has frozen up here, so I'll keep rolling on here. I think where that equity discussion leads us to is a look at what we call middle wage jobs, and those jobs that earn between $34,000 and $60,000 a year. And then when we look at that, what are the jobs that require a college degree, and those that don't require college degrees, and that's what you see down here in the lower left corner in terms of jobs like office support, construction, production, manufacturing, and transportation. And that's where sort of this equity focus leads us to those types of jobs. At the same time, we also look at not just those median wages, but like the 75th percentile wage. A lot of what you see or hear in the headlines in terms of starting wages, a lot of these job sectors start at have sort of the same starting point. But in terms of career ladders and progression, these middle wage jobs, and even especially like the construction jobs, have a much higher end career path, especially in occupations that don't require a 4-year college degree. And this has an impact on BIPOC income and wages. We've done an analysis on occupations that shows that both in terms of BIPOC incomes as well as specifically Black incomes, that the office and the manufacturing, production, and distribution sectors, our industrial sectors and our office sectors, those jobs result in higher BIPOC incomes than the education and healthcare sectors and the retail and consumer service sectors, which is again why we have a focus on the growth in those areas and the types of opportunities that is being provided. And how this ties back into the comp plan and the planning and the zoning map is that when we look at the wages and the types of jobs that occur in our industrial areas and our mixed employment areas, our back office areas, they really, this upper chart here on the left, they really provide those jobs in that those middle wage categories. Whereas if you look in our mixed use neighborhood commercial centers and the central city, we have that U-shaped polarized wage scale that has a lot of high income jobs and a lot of low income jobs and less opportunity in those middle wage sectors. This bottom graph, it really shows sort of where I was talking about in that chart above at the beginning in terms of where we wind up. What you see here in with each of these bars is the amount of growth capacity that we have in each of these different district types. What you see in the darker blue box outline is what the sort of forecasted demand from that that chart, that 2016 EOA chart, and it really shows, this surplus capacity in the central city and our neighborhood commercial areas, and that and especially in our industrial districts and our mixed employment districts, just how tight that capacity is. And as Steve was showing, the at-risk capacity there with both the primarily that risk capacity comes from in 2016, we were projecting a lot of brownfield remediation and reactivation, and especially along the Portland Harbor Superfund that hasn't really happened. And so that just makes that supply even tighter. In the interest of time, I'm just going to roll over here with a few process slides. You know, as Jen was saying, we are at the beginning of this process, and we expect that to sort of work towards pretty much towards through the end of this calendar year, in what we like to call a discussion draft, which is our preliminary work, our draft proposals, our draft analysis, sharing that with the community, sharing that with advisory groups such as this commission, getting feedback on that, and then eventually, hopefully, by the end of this calendar year and into next year, we will produce a proposed draft that will go to the Planning and Sustainability Commission. They are the ones that ultimately, as you know, when it comes to land use issues, make a recommendation to City Council. But we will be back here as part of that phase to brief you and let you comment on that those proposals, and you can, you know, as you've done in the past, send letters of testimony to the PSC, and then eventually it will go to City Council for adoption sometime in mid-2023. As part of this first phase, this discussion draft development phase, again, we're still early in that process in terms of both doing the technical analysis and starting our outreach process. We've been really focused on orienting people to what the EOA is all about, sharing some of these market trends summaries. And as Steve mentioned, we're about to publish a trends report that has a lot more detail in what you've seen today. We are now working on the forecast and supply information, and that'll come out next, probably in a couple of months. And then as that will help us inform a process where not only are we drafting scenarios or policy options, but also an evaluation framework that really gets at that sort of multi-objective policy process that is informed by the comprehensive plan. And I think where I'll leave it, and we can answer your questions, is, you know, as part of that scenario process, we really, you know, first and foremost in there are a number of significant decisions with respect to natural resources. As I mentioned before, we have E-zones along the Columbia Slough that we're looking at. We have floodplain regulations along the river. We can revisit the tree planting requirements in the heavy industrial zone. We have other things out there, such as the demand for new parks and larger sort of sports field facilities like Delta Park that just are really difficult to site in other parts of the city. And then also looking at how we can expand the employment capacity, especially in our industrial area, such as looking at what we can do in terms of brownfield cleanup programs and other map changes that might be out there. Again, we're looking at setting up a multi-objective evaluation framework in terms of not only looking at the economic outcomes, but what are the impacts in terms of natural resource functions, in terms of climate, public health, and as Steve was showing, the inclusive prosperity. And so I think I'll leave it with that. and we can answer any of your questions.
Right. Thank you, BPS team. Open it up to questions. Looks like Barbara has her hand up. Barbara?
Thanks, Vivek. Besides thinking maybe I should have gone into construction when I saw that income line.
Yeah.
I'm wondering if you can share that with us and have Brian send it out to us, because there's a lot of good information there. And I'd kind of like to ponder a lot of that.
Yeah, we'll share this slideshow and we'll also send Brian a link to the full report when we get that published within hopefully the next week or so as well. Yeah, because there's a lot of interesting data and there's a lot of numbers there that you got to sort of think through.
Yeah, thank you.
Great. Daniel.
Yeah, Tom and Steve, thank you very much. Good to see you back again. I would, just for the benefit of maybe some of the folks here who were not either part of our commission or part of the conversation that we had a few years ago, I just want to go back to drawing more of the explicit connection between our interest as a commission in the EOA. So one of the things we found was that in industrial areas, there are some pretty big heat island effects because a lot of those industrial areas tend not to have as many trees as say some other zoning types. And in addition to that, a lot of the big industrial areas are right next to neighborhoods that are low income, high percentage of people of color, so that having that big heat island effect is a different kind of equity issue in itself. And our interest was to see what we could do to try to get more trees in industrial areas. And one of the things we looked at was, hey, so much of these areas are like totally paved over. They don't need to all be paved over. There might be some opportunities for like getting space for large form trees by doing small de-pavings in big parking lots. But unfortunately, and please correct me if I don't have this quite right, as I remember, in the methodology used to look at job growth, especially in industrial areas, there was this explicit connection between the actual square footage in those areas and job growth, so that if we talked about de-paving areas to put in trees, that would be seen as decreasing the amount of space available for jobs or something kind of like that. And so one of the things we talked about a few years ago was, could we change the assumptions in the methodology so that in places where it was clear that we're not reducing potential areas for jobs, say, small de-pavings and things like that, that would not be seen as counting against job growth. So I just wanted to just mention that and see if we can put in a plug now for looking at that methodology and some of those assumptions. So thank you.
We can look at that and we can work with Brian and you all to figure out what that looks like. I mean, I guess ultimately, what we want to analyze and consider the impacts through this EOA is sort of what you would want to see is basically a future zoning code requirement, right? Whether if it's a landscaping requirement or, I think the last proposal was for a 10% canopy planting requirement or a tree preservation requirement. That's sort of what we need to analyze. And so we would need to work with you all to define what you mean by a small de-paving kind of thing, if you want that to be a zoning code requirement. If you want to create a voluntary program and work with businesses to find those pockets and the weird triangles that are never going to be anything and plant trees there, that's a wholly different proposition that's sort of outside the EOA calculations.
Yeah, I think yes, and sort of. I think we definitely want to look at potential options in Title 11 for, getting more trees into industrial areas, but we also want to look at that methodology in EOA so that as much as possible, trees are not seen as fighting against job growth in industrial areas.
Thanks, Daniel. That's helpful.
Tom, I could reply on this one as well. Sorry, I was disconnected earlier. I'm having Wi-Fi problems. I'm going to leave my picture off, and hopefully that'll help me to answer questions. I did some work through Johnson Economics for the commission a couple of years ago in looking at tree code improvements. First, generally in the industrial areas, tree code improvements or tree code requirements already apply in about 80% of our industrial land. It was only an exemption in the heavy industrial and in the IG1 areas. And the code was recently changed to require them in the IG1 areas. So really the shortfall or the gap now is only in the heavy industrial areas that are nearly all developed. And essentially the way the issue comes up now is that the vacant land in the heavy industrial zones that are nearly all developed tends to be edge parts of sites that have a lot of trees on them. And we count that buildable land inventory as growth capacity for growth in those areas. So it has a direct result in growth capacity for jobs. And we have the tightest land supply in the harbor access lands that is much of the heavy industrial area. So it does have a fairly big impact. And because of the lower density in those zones, it has a bigger impact than other types of land where you can cluster the trees in another part of the site. So we talked about looking at alternatives, different approaches that work better to try to meet multiple goals. And I think that's an opportunity here. We would like to look at just policy trade-offs too of making decisions on the adequate capacity.
Okay, thanks, Steve. Brian, do you want a quick response? Sounds like you have something. Megan, can you hold? Brian has a direct response.
Yeah, I just wanted to add to what Tom and Steve were noting. And Steve noted that we did remove the exemptions for some other industrial lands. The IH1 is the only remaining one. And, we were able to do that because Title 11 requirements are not part of the land use code. They're akin to other on-site infrastructure requirements such as stormwater. Stormwater management is a requirement of site development, and that is not part of the land use code either. So that is one of the things that we are considering in this project. Urban Forestry is actually working right now to quantify the environmental and public health benefits of the existing trees in the IH zones. And to also look at if those IH on-site tree planting requirements were applied from Title 11, what is the anticipated canopy growth we would anticipate over the course of the next 20, 25 years of a job growth? And I think Tom detailed that part of it well, in that those are the sort of policy decisions that we'll be presenting so that when City Council reviews this, they'll be able to understand here are the environmental benefits that we are trying to protect currently. Here are potential impacts of preserving those trees. It could result in a reduction in developable land, but here are the services that the community is getting as a result of that. So it's really about just giving the best information that we have.
Thanks, Brian. Megan?
I actually am glad I got to wait because Steve and Brian's comments kind of spoke to some of my questions, but I think I was just wanting to make certain that I fully truly understand what we're talking about in these industrial areas in terms of like potential growth capacity and development capacity. And it really sounds like to me what we're talking about, right, is vacant or these underutilized lands, right? And the kind of preservation of trees in those areas versus some of the existing industrial lands that have already been developed. Is that accurate, or am I slightly inaccurate? I guess for more context, so I live in North Portland. So sometimes I will share that when we talk about industrial zones as if they don't exist with neighborhoods, it is a little frustrating, only because like I live just south of Columbia Park, right? Like I live next to industrial areas. Like when I ride my bike to Kelly Point Park, as I did this weekend, like that's what I bike through. Like that's my neighborhood. You know, and when you go through the industrial areas in North Portland, right, there's a lot of empty, underutilized space, including on developed lands that are heavy industrial developed land. So I'm just trying to fully understand what we're talking about so I understand the true challenge. So does that make sense? I'm just trying to really get the nitty gritty of this intersection of trees and land.
It's sort of a both and situation, right? You know, mainly we focus on the growth and the future development and where that can go. And, you know, and we look at in those industrial areas, like what is vacant land there that, you know, yeah, a lot of businesses have bought large parcels and they add over time buildings and expand, and we count those little bits and pieces like Steve was talking about in terms of that. And so, yeah, we are looking at sort of like, and we also look at in terms of job growth, like how much of the job growth has gone into existing buildings. And sort of, we call that intensification, you know, and that, you know, when the buildings don't always are not always run at 100% capacity, right? You know, businesses have room to grow within their existing space. And so we try and factor that in as well. But what Brian's really talking about is, you know, what is that increment, right? That and especially in the heavy industrial zone where that lack the tree standards right now, you know, how much growth are we expecting in that area? How much of that is treed in terms of our buildable land supply? You know, sort of what's at risk, and be able to generate all of that information so that we can really see, you know, what existing trees are at risk and how much of that development do we expect to take place? What would be the incremental impact of a planting or a preservation requirement on the heavy industrial zone? How does that, you know, what slice of future growth capacity is that? And that's all of the information that we want to bring forward, that sort of becomes that sort of recommended adopted EOA that says, no, we're gonna do this, and it's gonna wind up, and here's our future industrial capacity, and here's what we think we can accommodate given all of these objectives.
Yeah, and one, is there, I'm just curious, almost like to Daniel's point earlier, right? Like I look at some of those areas and think we're already underutilizing the land that has been developed. So, you know, one concern I have, we sometimes talk about doing offsets, right? Like, and right now it's kind of, these areas are largely exempt anyways, but I feel like not only do we need to talk about preserving the land, but like, how can we offset land if, like, as a conversation point, if someone's having to develop, how do we, is there ways to focus on having another property within that area then take that capacity, like in focusing it within these areas? Because I mean, not only in terms of just urban heat island, but you know, North Portland in particular is adjacent to two major riverways, and just the environmental impacts of that is so monumental. So I just think of, I don't want us to only, you know, I understand the economic implications, but if were we to have requirements and it just ended up with being trees elsewhere, we actually have not addressed the very problem that we need within these industrial areas. But that's my thought. Thank you.
Megan, can I also, we're out of time too, but comment on the underutilization. I think that's a common perspective as well. When you look at actually real estate trends, the lowest vacancy rates among land use types are generally in the industrial areas. In the last, after 2015, vacancy rates in industrial areas regionally and even more in the city are down to around 3%. It's fully used. It's tighter than residential. uses. So the land is fully utilized from that perspective. It is lower density uses. They tend to be large sites. They tend to be lots of outdoor spaces because that's the nature of those activities. When we look at things in terms of density and efficient use in cities, we might say single family neighborhoods are inefficient use of cities, but we try not to look at that way and accommodate different types. They all have value, but in terms of accommodating industrial land demand, that floor area ratio of the types of things that get built are fairly low. So from that perspective, it's not at all underutilized. Actually, it's a very tight land supply.
Steve, just to clarify, I am talking about underutilization of like green space within those lands. Like if you go by, there's a lot of grass and not a lot of trees and it's
Sure.
areas. So that I don't mean that they've covered those lots otherwise with a lot of pavement and buildings, but I'm saying the rest of that land is underutilized for what it could be.
Yeah, and
That's a good point.
we capture those grassy areas, and it may be one part of a developed site, but we try and capture that and count that as future growth capacity.
Okay.
Whereas there's a different sort of calculation in Steve's example, like on the housing side, we don't count everybody having an accessory dwelling unit in their backyard, even though the zoning code allows it.
Right. Great. Thanks, Steve. Thanks, Tom.
I
We're
will
out of
just,
time.
I just one more point, just in terms of process, like we anticipate sort of coming back to you all to late summer, early fall to share where we're at in this discussion draft development phase as we go along. So you all can follow along the development of this whole process.
I would love to hear back from you and set aside time for that coming up here. We know you're early in the process and still several steps to go. So thanks for the update, Steve, Tom. I'd like to just get us back on schedule here and transition to the Title 11 amendments. Brian and Nick, I think, are on point for that. Yeah.
Yes, thanks, Vivek. So we do have about 10 or 15 minutes for this, since we do want to get to the policy committee talking a little bit more about the pedestrian design guide update. So yeah, Nick and I are back after attending last month as well to talk about the proposed amendments to Title 11. As always, we remind everyone that these are technical and minor policy amendments that we are looking to make as part of the sort of phase one of our overall improvement to the tree code. So Nick and I went over, about a third of them last month, and then we left you with the documents of the full list of proposed changes. So really, we're here to provide just some more space for comments you may have if you had more time to review. We are aiming to have a public hearing on these as required by Title 11 as part of the May UFC meeting. So we will have more extensive time to discuss, but since we are in the sort of final review phase before we really formally propose these are the amendments that are going to City Council, we wanted to just give you a little bit of space for that. So feel free to provide any comments. We have received some comments on this project. Trees for Life submitted a very thoughtful response, which has been really helpful. And so I imagine there are other comments still.
Nick, anything else to add to that?
No, floor is open. Floor is open.
Okay.
Any questions?
Okay. Commissioners, sounds like it's an open invitation for any feedback.
Daniel, yes.
Yeah, hi. I know we talked about this last time, but since Greg is not here today, I thought I would mention something that she and I both have a concern here, and that is about the heritage trees that are actually not dead or dying, but are considered dangerous, that these changes would sort of take that out of the realm of the Urban Forestry Commission voting to remove that. And so I know Greg and I we both would like to keep that something that the UFC votes on. And that's, again, kind of breaking it up in that dead, yeah, that's clear. That doesn't need, shouldn't need a vote. Dying, same thing, but dangerous, that could mean a lot of different things. So I just wanted to put that out again.
I can address that. And we hear that concern. Currently, UFC reviews for trees that are when there are removal requests or removal of designation. And we've been discussing this in forestry. Dead, dying, and dangerous are calls that we make as staff professionally after assessing the trees. So the intent is to increase efficiency of the process and mitigate any hazards or the burden of having a tree that's dead and standing or dying and standing on your land. So those are calls that we make professionally as the tree inspectors will make those calls. And so this is just aligning our process with the heritage trees with the process that we already have in place.
And just to clarify that, the city forester is currently able to remove trees that are determined dangerous without first going to the UFC. That is a current part of code, and that's really in order to expedite emergency situations with a tree. There just isn't time to go to the UFC. The code change expands that to dead or dying trees as well. So just to clarify where the expansion of the city forest authority there is, and I see Jen has her hands up too.
Yeah, thank you all for the discussion and Daniel for bringing that, because yes, I'm sure Greg would again. Let me see if I have captured what Greg and Daniel and other commissioners' concern might be. It's that because they're heritage trees, they're treated differently than other trees in the city. They're special, right? They have the highest level of protection in the city. And so what I hear the commission saying is, although, as Nick said, staff review thousands of trees every day according to the code criteria for what comprises something that may be removed. There's an extra step for heritage trees that involves the commission. And because these are heritage trees in particular, you all would like that step to stay and it not be treated, heritage trees not fall more into the routine work that our staff do in their professional analysis of what comprises a dead tree, et cetera. Does that sound about right?
Close. I think it's more that this definition of a dangerous tree, a dangerous heritage tree, was something that we wanted to retain, UFC voting on that for removal, because I don't think in the discussion we had before that it's like if something is dead or dying, that's pretty clear. But sometimes dangerous could be dangerous to another tree, or I don't know whatever that was, but that was really the gist of this conversation.
And I'll remind everyone that dangerous is defined in code as well. I can try and find the code section.
Yes, but clearly if the UFC has to be consulted, that's in code. Somebody at some point must have thought there was a reason, right? I mean, we've had to vote on removal of dead, dying, or dangerous tree, haven't we? Dead, dying, or dangerous heritage trees. So at some point, somebody thought that was a good idea. So I think what Greg and I are just saying is that, no issue with dead or dying. It's just the dangerous issue.
Yeah.
And could I ask Daniel, have you looked at the definition of dangerous in the code?
Not recently.
Okay, maybe Nick can find that and throw
So
that.
do you think it was maybe in whoever wrote Title 11 that this was just an oversight?
Yeah, I don't know that. I will say that overall, when I look at the code as a whole, it seems like treatment of heritage trees is kind of light. A lot of things are not well fleshed out. So it just makes me wonder if maybe it was for whatever reason, not as thoroughly thought through about how things would actually play out in practice, while trying to give a nod to the fact that heritage trees are special. And so this is because this is really about process, right? And we're adding process layers when we have additional review steps by whatever body. And that's the issue that we're seeing. But I do appreciate, I think it was Bruce's question, maybe it was somebody else's question in a previous conversation about, you know, what if somebody is in our team is not so much about preserving and protecting trees, then what kind of checks are there on that? And the question we all have in forestry is that, well, then we would have massive problems, not just with heritage trees, with everything else, because dead, dying, dangerous are defined, and the code says when, how the code should be applied by staff, regardless of who's in the seat. So that's what we're trying to navigate right now. It's just like, what's that?
Mm-hmm. And I'll just add that Daniel, Trees for Life submitted a very similar comment, and you know, questions about how that how that part of the code will be changed. So we're definitely taking that into consideration.
Barbara? Oh, sorry. Nick, quick response.
Yeah, the one thing that occurs to me is that you know, since the commission has voted in the past, whether that's, you know, regardless of specifically what the code says or, you know, doesn't say, or how we've been operating, or maybe how we could have been operating, whatever. What occurs to me is that the presentations that we've had and the discussions that we've had about different species, I think has kept the commission in touch with the heritage tree program, and kind of followed along. It's, you know, that tree that you pass every day is in fact dying, or, or maybe you noticed it and now it's up for potential removal. So that, you know, keeping dead, dying, and dangerous, to be voted upon, to me, keeps the commission in touch with that. And although I understand the imminent danger issue as well, but not every dead tree is an imminent danger, and the same with dying. And maybe the same with dangerous. I guess it depends on the danger. Anyway, I think it keeps the commission as active and present as far as heritage trees go. Just a comment.
Jen, you have a response to that?
I do. I appreciate that, Barbara. That's great. Regardless of how this particular process around heritage trees go, there is still the Volunteer Heritage Tree Committee, and the commission, specifically in code, is responsible for forwarding recommendations to City Council on what trees should be listed or delisted as heritage trees as well. So that nobody is proposing amendments to that. So I feel that's still a significant component of engagement for the commission.
Yeah, different issue, but yeah, you're right.
Okay. Nick, Brian, are you open to additional feedback via email and follow up? Well, is there a mechanism, just email you directly, or is that okay?
Yeah, they can email us directly. We do have an email address set up for this project specifically, which does help us keep all the feedback in one place, which I think Nick might be typing into the chat right now. But of course, we will be having a public hearing in May.
Okay. All right. Great. Thanks, Nick, for that info about definition of dangerous as well in the chat. All right. Good. So let's thank you, Brian. Let's move, and Nick, let's move into the final, or at least the second to final item on our agenda, looking at pedestrian design guidelines. You remember we've been having that conversation in the public and prepping for the public hearing. We've had, memos written by the policy committee. We've had several discussions here. So Brian, do you want to tee that one up?
Yeah, sure thing. So we have heard from PBOT that they will be holding a public hearing on the proposed administrative rule that will be signed by their bureau director to implement the pedestrian design guide update. So right now they have the newest draft of the plan is posted. I forwarded that email a couple weeks ago to the commission, and they have a current public comment period open until April 1st, and then the public hearing will be held on April 4th. One of the reasons I wanted to be sure, and Daniel wanted to be sure that this is on the agenda today for the commission is, we did hear previously from PBOT that the public hearing will only be held if a public comment is received by that April 1st deadline. So we just wanted to be sure that I'm sure other comments will be received that will ensure that public hearing does take place. But I know this has been a significant priority for the commission. And so wanted to be sure that the commission gets an opportunity to talk through that, to submit any additional comments by April 1st, and then also plan to provide any comments at that public hearing on April 4th.
Wow, great. And do we want to talk about who might be representing?
Yeah, sure. Good. I'll turn. Yeah, sorry, Vivek. Yeah.
Yeah, so I know we've had Daniel was presenting yesterday at the council meeting. So thinking about this in terms of who might be available and who might be interested in testimony. I know the policy committee had a memo that was written, and Michelle Marks at PBOT had responded to that, and so it's a conversation that's opened up, and so there's still a lot more to be addressed, and I think this is an opportunity for us to really show up at the public hearing. Daniel.
Yeah, thank you, Vic. I guess first of all, PBOT, as people probably saw in the materials for today's meeting, they have kind of a brief description of what's changed in the current draft. And I definitely give PBOT credit. They've definitely added some things in there on trees. I think there's still some things that we should push for to get in there. Vivek, you remember that when we talked to Commissioner Hardesty's policy director, it sounded like one of the things they were really open to is committing to trying to make sure that they get several trees, large form trees, space on every city block, something along those lines. So there's some things like that. I think we should definitely continue to comment, continue to weigh in here, because there are some changes, but there are definitely some things that we asked for in our letters. Didn't make it into the draft new draft, as far as I can tell. So it would be great if we could continue to submit. And I understand just from some other folks in other community groups I've talked to in the last month, that there's definitely some interest here. And by us even submitting a comment, if that helps to open the way for a public meeting to allow other groups around the city to comment as well, I think that would be a good service. I think in order to do that, we need to take a vote here to authorize someone, or maybe the policy committee, to submit an additional round of comments, if that's what we want to do. As usual, we have our policy committee meetings the Monday evening after a UFC full commission meeting. So we can work on that next Monday if that's something that the commission wants us to do.
I don't think we have quorum.
Yeah, I think, well, with Anjanette, I think we might actually. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So yes, we are at 9 seating seated members right now. So we are above the 50% threshold for a vote. So in fact, we could actually go back if we have time for a couple of other votes that we jumped over. But I also don't want to move things along too quickly without necessary. So
And
Daniel, yeah, go
I
ahead.
was just going to add, I do think that given the number of votes we've held on this issue, I think the commission's made it clear they support Daniel and the policy committee commenting on this plan. So even though I think we do have quorum, if technical difficulties at the moment prevent anyone from casting a vote, I do think that the direction from the UFC is already clear on this.
Okay. Do we, Daniel, any follow-up? Any, do you want to call a motion?
Well, I just want to be clear. So at this point, there's not a date for an actual public meeting because it's not determined that there's going to be one until they get a comment, at least one comment. So I guess at this point, what we're looking for, and I would make a motion that the policy committee be authorized to submit comments to PBOT on the latest and current pedestrian design guide draft to get it into PBOT on or before April 1st. That's my motion.
Okay, so it's a response to the latest. So the motion is response to the latest response from PBOT. Okay. Any friendly amendments, or do I hear a second?
Could you repeat
Barbara?
that motion, please?
Go ahead, Daniel.
Okay, I make a motion that the UFC give authority to the policy committee to respond to the current draft of the pedestrian design guide and get it into PBOT by the April 1st deadline. I just saw something in the chat, so I guess I'd like to add to that and just open the door for having someone from the policy committee give testimony at a public meeting pursuant to that.
So if the motion's on the table, I would second.
Okay, Barbara seconds. All right, I can call a vote then. All in favor for Daniel's motion? Looks like Megan's got a virtual hand up. You can raise your virtual or hand. Okay, I see unanimous. Thank you, commissioners. Okay, Daniel, thanks for taking the lead on that. Really appreciate the work of the policy committee. It's so amazing how much material you're all generating, and I am on the email, so I can see it's a robust conversation as well, more generally. So thank you. Great. Future agenda items as we come around the last 9 minutes of our meeting time together. We've had conversations ongoing about future agenda items, and it's really something that I think we want to make sure we have a means for being able to develop a system for getting future agenda items. And what I've met with Brian and Jen about this, and I'll maybe just reiterate some of what we talked about. Generally speaking, what we have is 12 meetings a year. Sometimes, I mean, we're required to have 10, I think, by code. Though 12 meetings per year is what it looks like we generally are meeting together on these Thursday mornings. And many of those meetings are already in some way set up with necessary code-based votes and requirements, though there is time outside of that for walk-on items and things along those lines that we'd like to have. Actually, it's not quite walk-on, it's pre-scheduled items that we want to put in the agenda. And so we've had several of those come in already. You've been sending Brian those, and he's been collecting those. And so Brian, I guess I might check in with you about the development of a calendar that actually, one thing that we came up with was the idea of development of a calendar of each month and the things that generally have to happen and need to go to city council ahead of time. So we would all have access to that calendar to know what's coming up in future meetings, and really trying to be a lot more proactive about having a scope of meetings throughout the year. So we know generally what needs to happen, and then what are the available time slots. And so that's one strategy or tactic that Jen, Brian, and I came up with in our last meeting. And I wanted to just at least maybe ask Brian first to flesh out anything else about future agenda items that you've been, I know, corralling, and there are several items there. And also I'll bring note to the fact that Jen provided a note, or Brian sent a note, which included a letter from Jen Cairo about aspects of the future agenda items as well. So I want to maybe have a little bit of time for discussing that, starting with Brian.
Yeah, thanks, Vivek. And I think that this is a great topic for the retreat that we have planned on May as well, to talk about how we schedule out ahead of time for agenda events. One of the things that we talked about was having a clearer sort of trajectory. So here, both having, here's what our annual calendar looks like, but here's what we have teed up for, say, the next three months. And that'll give current UFC members, I think, a chance to respond if there's an item 3 months out that they might think is not something that they want to discuss. They can provide feedback on that, but also note, oh, there's some topics that I see aren't on the agenda that we really need to get to. So just to provide a little bit more clarity on the agenda items that we have, and also keep a running list that I think would probably be on the UFC webpage, the requested items to discuss as well. I know that a few months ago, we had some time like this, and UFC members had a few really great ideas about hearing from community members on how they think tree canopy reduction can be addressed, more information on large tree removal on private property, how to be more proactive with regards to protecting trees in development situations. So these are all really great topics that I think sometimes we don't have time to get to because we're responding to other plans and issues going on. So I think having a chance, particularly at the retreat, to plan out a little bit further in advance will allow us to get to more of those things.
All right, Megan.
I just have a quick clarifying question, and I apologize. My internet is really not good. I'm at Audubon and internet cell. It's all terrible. Up here.
No. We can hear you well.
Yeah, great. I guess in understanding what, Brian, you just said, so is the idea that there would be a space that all our future agenda items are compiled and a calendar for when they could fit in? And I guess my question with that is, like, then how does the item end up on the agenda? Like, is it we all agree we want to talk about it? And then what happens when pressing items come up and suddenly the item is not able to be on the agenda?
Yeah, that's exactly right. So I think that's why we're thinking we are typically able to plan about 3 months out. Planning much further than that can be really challenging because many of the items that come to our attention that need the UFC's input, we don't hear about with more than 1 or 2 months advance notice. So I think that's why having tentative agendas planned about 3 months out that are posted to the webpage and that the UFC has continual access to will help with that process. And then actually setting the agenda is, it's a collaborative effort between the chair and the city forester to ensure that, timely items that are within the scope of the UFC's role are set.
Hey, Barbara?
Yeah, I mean, I'm terming off, so you can take my comments with that caveat. But it seems to me that the agenda should be a combination of, we're an advisory council, so we're, providing advice to the city forester in the program. And it seems that the agenda should be a combination of what the commission itself thinks is important to provide advice on, and what the city thinks is important to receive advice on. And, that I think that dance, given, that we oftentimes get excellent presentations, and then sometimes, we bring up issues and then we have to cut conversations short. I think that dance maybe needs some refining, and there may be things, more things that the city, needs advice on. And like Brian says, that the timing doesn't always work, but it seems like there ought to be a running list of things that the commission would like to give advice on or discuss, or, whatever.
Yeah, thanks, Barbara. And I think that's exactly right. And that is part of the purpose of having the agenda post a few more months out, because I do recognize that, Vivek, Jen, and I do our best to build the agenda, but that often means that the commission doesn't know what's on the agenda until the week beforehand. And so I think that's one of the reasons that having it posted a few more months out will let the commission, provide their input if there's something on the agenda in a few months. So thanks.
Okay. Daniel?
Yeah, just a couple things. And I guess if we can all get used to checking in on some online list, that could be a good way of getting agenda items identified. I'm wondering though, if it might be worthwhile, like we're doing now, to have the last 10 minutes of each meeting, just an opportunity for each commissioner to go around for 1 minute only, and just either say, hey, I'd like to get this issue on the agenda, or just whatever comment relevant to UFC they'd like to make. That could be a good thing to do, just the last 10 minutes. The other thing, it occurs to me with all the turnover we're having, and maybe this is something we do at the May retreat, but let's really talk about onboarding new members and just some different things we can do. And I think that those of us who've been on the commission longer, I think we should really be taking an active role in helping to onboard new members. So I'm certainly willing to help with that. So I just wanted to throw that out.
Thanks, Daniel. Great idea. I like that. I've been in several meetings where we have walk-on items at the end, and I like the idea of saving a little bit of time just to kind of, since everyone's kind of in the zone after, our 2 hours together, it'd be great to kind of have a list of that starting up. And I appreciate, Brian, you're bringing those up in our meetings together about things that you've been hearing from commissioners, and kind of making a list of those items. And also want to bring back up the retreat and an opportunity to kind of bring those items up, and because there's a whole prioritization that would happen. Like if we all gave Brian, 2-3 things, then we all have to figure out what is the priority of those things as well. So each of this is it's going to take a little bit of time and kind of thought in coming up with the coherent set of things that we can actually make progress on through the year, and the timing of those things, of when best to talk about them, as we're dealing with a complex system of a big public bureaucracy system here, which rears its head in very different ways at different times. So yeah, lots of moving parts. And so like the idea, Daniel. Anything else before we close out then today?
Well, just because we now know that 2 people who are here today are going to be leaving the commission. I know this is Barbara's last meeting. Just wanted to say an extra thank you to Barbara all these years, especially serving on the appeals board and the appeals board chair. And Jeanette, we learned that you're going to be leaving UFC too. I don't know, is this your last meeting? You're going to be here for a few more meetings?
No, I was asked to stay on until there's a replacement.
Oh, yay. Okay.
Oh, excellent. Well, maybe we'll think of new ways to keep you from leaving. We'll pull you back in.
Yeah.
Also, if people haven't read, there's an article in High Country News featuring Ann Jeanette.
Yes, I saw that. It's amazing.
Yeah.
Cool. It's fun. Can you put that link, Megan, if you have it conveniently available in the chat for others?
I
Or
don't,
maybe-
but I can send it, or maybe
Okay.
Brian's always faster at everything than I
Yeah.
am.
Yeah,
But
I can send it around. Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
yeah, great. Oh, there it is. Okay, thank you. Thanks, Ted. Well, thanks, everybody. I think we're, Barbara, real honor, pleasure, really grateful for all the, lifelong career doing forestry work. And then even after you finish 30 plus years in the Forest Service, you keep on coming back for more. So your commitment to forests and trees and the earth in general is so deeply honored to work with you. And I've worked with you as my program officer at the U.S. Forest Service as well. So I've known you, interacted with you in at least two different contexts. So thank you again for all the effort. I know we'll find a way. I wish we could meet in person, find a way to also thank you in different ways. Jen.
Barbara has been fantastic. I can't say it enough about the appeals board and getting a real structure and format for that together and updated bylaws. She was the real driver behind that. So thank you so much, Barbara. You've brought a much clearer and I think more comfortable for appellants process to the works. Thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah. All right. Well, thanks everybody. Really appreciate your time today and we'll catch you in a month, if not sooner. Take care.
Thanks, everyone.
Meeting's adjourned.